Okay, hello class. Long time no see. I miss seeing you guys every day, but we are starting to talk about Mendelian genetics. And we talked a little bit about Gregor Mendel before we left for our long break, but not very much. So, Mendelian genetics. So, first of all, remember, with the exception of gametes, the egg and the sperm, all cells in your body are diploid and contain two copies of each chromosome. Okay? One copy from mom in the egg and one copy from dad in the sperm. So how many total chromosomes make up who you are? Do you remember this? All right, some more definitions. Genes. Genes are the section of DNA that provide instructions for making proteins. Since a gene is a piece of a chromosome, and we have two of every chromosome, we have two copies of instructions to make every protein in our body. Alleles. Alleles are different versions of the same gene. So it's the same gene, but you might get one copy of brown hair from your mom and one copy of black hair from your dad, or something like that. So we inherited a full set of chromosomes containing genes from each of our parents, but we may not have inherited the same version of every gene. Mom may have given you a gene for blue eyes and dad gave you a gene for brown eyes. That type of thing. Okay, homologous chromosomes. These are the matching chromosomes from our mom and dad. Remember that? You get one chromosome from each parent. They have the same genes, the same types of genes, but not the same versions of each gene. The same genes in the same locations, but may contain very different alleles. Okay, so Gregor Mendel, he's known as the father of genetics. He was an Austrian monk, and he lived from 1822 to 1884, and he used pea plants to learn about genetics. Like I said, he's known as the father of genetics. He had 3 laws of inheritance that he came up with. By the way, he did all of this work, but people didn't really realize how important it was until after he had died. His 3 laws of inheritance are the law of dominance, the law of segregation, and the law of independent assortment. All right, so what are different versions of the same gene? Okay, so let's talk about Mendel's experiments. He studied and bred plants. He made 3 choices about his experiments. He had control over the breeding. He controlled which plants bred with which. He used pea plants that typically self-pollinate. And controlled flower color. Here's some of the different characteristics: the shapes of the pea pods, the color of the pea pods, flower color. He used only purebred plants. Purebred means that the organism's ancestors are genetically uniform. And he observed either or traits. They are either green or yellow, round or wrinkled. So he chose pea shape, pea color, pod shape, pod color, plant height, flower color, things that were easy to determine. So what is a cross? A cross is simply the mating of 2 organisms. P is called the parental generation, so the parents are P. The first generation is F1, second generation is F2, and so on and so forth. So let's talk about the law of dominance. A dominant allele, dominant meaning strong, will express itself over a recessive allele, or weak. Now, this doesn't mean that the dominant allele is better than the recessive one. It just means if the 2 are together, you only see the dominant one. Dominant alleles will always be expressed, so if the dominant trait is there, you will see it. We show it as a capital letter. For example, the letter capital B to represent the allele for brown hair. If you inherited the capital B allele from one or both of your parents, you will have brown hair. Doesn't matter if you have a big B or a big B little b. If you have a brown hair gene from your dad and that's dominant, but a black hair gene from your mom and that's recessive, you will have brown hair. Okay. Recessive allele will only have that trait expressed when the dominant allele is not present, and it's shown as a lowercase letter. So if brown hair is dominant over blonde hair, the letter little b represents the allele for blonde hair. The only way to get blonde hair is to inherit the little b allele from both parents. Okay, so you have to have two little b's. If there's a big B there, it will be expressed. So think back to a couple of slides ago. What is the F1 generation? Okay, remember P is the parental generation. F1 is the first generation after the parents. Okay, genotype versus phenotype. Genotype is the actual alleles inherited, the genes. So flower color, it could be big A, big A, big A, or little a, little a. The genotype is this. Is it two big A's, a big A, or two little a's? Phenotype is the physical characteristics or traits of an organism. Purple flowers. And there may be, if purple is dominant, you may have two different genotypes to get the same phenotype. You could have a big A, or a big A, little a, because remember, it only takes one of the dominant. Okay, so the significance of alleles. We give them assigned letters. Uppercase is dominant, lowercase is recessive. Each individual has two alleles, one from each parent. Here's more terminology. Homozygous, remember homo for same, like homonym. Homozygous has two of the same alleles. It's either a big A, or a little a, little a. Heterozygous means two different alleles. So you've got one dominant and one recessive. Hetero for different. Okay, the law of segregation. When chromosomes separate in meiosis, each gamete, the egg or sperm, will receive only one chromosome from each pair. Remember? So if a man has alleles for brown hair and blonde hair, he's heterozygous. Big B, little b. His sperm cells can contain the allele for brown hair or the allele for blonde hair. Each sperm only gets one of the alleles, and this is random. So the sperm cell will, even if the parent, the father, has big B, little b, the offspring are only going to get one of those letters from him, either a capital B or a lowercase b. So what's the difference between genotype and phenotype? Remember, phenotype is the appearance, genotype is the genes present. Okay, the law of independent assortment. Move my picture out of the way again. Okay, so the assortment of chromosomes for one trait doesn't affect the assortment of chromosomes for another trait. So if you're looking at hair color and eye color, normally they assort independently. So just because you get the dominant gene for hair color, you might get the recessive gene for eye color. One doesn't affect the other. Any combination of maternal, mother, and paternal, father, chromosomes could be passed on because homologous chromosomes line up randomly during metaphase 1. Remember when they line up together? It's random. the body doesn't remember which chromosome came from which parent. Okay, Punnett squares, and you've done Punnett squares before. May have been a while, but this is a diagram that shows the probability of inheriting traits from parents with certain genes. And the way it works, you put the genotype of one parent at the top, genotype of the other parent on the side, doesn't matter which, and you drop it down. So the big A goes down, the little a goes down here, big A goes across here, little a goes across here. So you end up with the different possibilities. These are the possible genotypes. And here it shows again. So this is the male, the pollen from the flower, and the ovary or the pistil. You can see how you do the Punnett square. The big B's come down, little b comes down, big B goes across, little b goes across. So these are your possibilities. And the phenotypes, if purple is dominant, anyone with the capital B will be dominant. If it has two lowercase b's, it will be recessive. In this case, the capital B is dominant, it's purple. Lowercase b is recessive, it's white. Okay, if an organism has two copies of the same allele, what is it called? Remember, homo means same, so it's homozygous. Okay, so let's try this. The first one, it says try crossing a homozygous recessive with a homozygous dominant individual. Okay, homo means same, remember. Homozygous recessive means it has two recessive genes. Homozygous dominant means it has two dominant genes. I picked R for this. It was random, but it works. So homozygous dominant, two capital R's. Homozygous recessive, two lowercase r's. When you combine them, you bring the capital R down here and here, lowercase r across here and here. So you end up with capital R, lowercase r, lowercase r, and the same here. So the genotype ratio, this is just how many of each genotype do you have. And if you look, we have all the same. So it's not really a ratio. You have 4 capital R, lowercase r. Phenotype ratio, what does it look like? It's going to be the dominant trait. They all have 1 capital R, so it's all 4 with the dominant trait. Okay, next we're going to do 2 heterozygous individuals. So we have capital R, lowercase r for one parent. Heterozygous, different. Both of the parents are heterozygous, capital R, lowercase r. So we bring the capital R down, capital R across, so you end up 2 capital R's, capital R, little r, capital R, little r, little r, little r. Now our genotype ratios, we're actually going to have ratios. Genotype, remember, is the pattern of the letters. Which genes are there? So you have 1 big R, 2 big R, little r's, and 1 little r, little r. Phenotype, though, remember anything with even 1 capital R is going to have the dominant trait. So we're going to have 3 dominant to 1 recessive. Okay, next we're going to try crossing a heterozygous individual with a homozygous recessive individual. So here's our heterozygous individual, capital R, lowercase r. Now we have a homozygous recessive individual, lowercase r, lowercase r. So remember, the capital R will come down, lowercase r will come down, lowercase r will go across, lowercase r will go across, so we end up capital R, little r, little r, little r, capital R, little r, little r, little r. Genotype ratio, what do we have this time? We have 2 big R, little r, and 2 little r, little r. 2 to 2. The phenotype ratio, what are they going to look like? We have 2 dominants and 2 recessives. Okay, so if an organism has two copies of the same allele, what is it called? Remember, it's homozygous. Okay, so that's all for today. I'll give you some practice on this in the next couple of days, and we'll go on with the presentation and see how it gets a little bit more complicated later. All right? Okay, I miss you guys. Have a good day and stay safe.